The restaurant was exactly what you'd expect on a quiet weekday night. Soft music played in the background, plates clinked, and conversations blended into a low, comfortable hum. Families sat in booths, couples leaned toward each other across candlelit tables, and servers moved back and forth with practiced ease. It was the kind of place where nothing dramatic ever seemed to happen. A young waitress made her way across the floor, balancing a tray with careful focus. She looked tired but polite, the way service workers often do after a long shift. When she stopped at one particular table, her expression changed just slightly, barely noticeable, but enough to signal discomfort. An off-duty police officer sat there, leaning back in his chair with a casual arrogance. His voice was louder than necessary, his tone sharp. At first, it sounded like simple impatience. Complaints about the food, the wait time, the service. But within moments, it crossed into something else. He spoke down to her, questioning her competence, making remarks that had nothing to do with the meal in front of him. The waitress tried to stay professional. She nodded, apologized, offered to fix whatever he wanted. Still, the officer wasn't satisfied. He leaned forward, letting the badge clipped at his belt catch the light, as if it were part of the conversation. The implication was clear, even if nothing was said outright. A few nearby diners noticed. Some glanced over, then quickly looked away. Others froze mid-bite, sensing tension but unsure whether to intervene. The room felt different now, heavier, quieter, as if everyone was holding their breath. At a table just a few feet away, a man sat calmly, watching it all unfold. He wore simple clothes. No entourage. No attention drawn to him. His posture was relaxed, his expression unreadable. To most people in the restaurant, he was just another customer enjoying a meal. But he wasn't just anyone. Steven Seagal had been sitting there the entire time, observing silently. He didn't interrupt. He didn't react emotionally. His eyes followed every movement, every shift in tone, every moment where the line was pushed a little further. And as the officer continued, unaware of who was watching him so closely, one thing became clear. What this cop was about to do next would change the entire night. The officer didn't raise his voice at first. That was the most unsettling part. His tone stayed measured, almost casual, as if what he was doing was perfectly normal. He tapped the edge of the menu with 2 fingers and looked up at the waitress like she was wasting his time. "I've been waiting long enough," he said. "You people are all the same, slow, careless, no sense of urgency." The words landed harder than he probably realized. The waitress blinked, clearly trying to process whether she had heard him correctly. She took a quiet breath and answered the way she had been trained to. "I'm sorry, sir. The kitchen's a little backed up tonight, but I'll check on your order right away." That should have been the end of it. It usually was, but the officer leaned back in his chair and smirked, enjoying the moment a little too much. "Maybe you didn't hear me," he replied. "I said I've been waiting. Do you know who I am?" The question hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. His hand drifted toward his belt, not in a threatening way, but close enough for the badge to be visible. It caught the overhead light, a subtle reminder of power. Not authority earned in that moment, but authority assumed. The waitress stiffened, her shoulders tightened, and for a split second, her eyes flicked toward the manager's station. No one stepped in. No one moved. The restaurant, once warm and lively, felt frozen. "I understand," she said carefully. "I'll take care of it." But the officer wasn't done. "You'd better," he said, "because I don't like being disrespected, especially not by someone who can't even do their job right." A couple at the next table exchanged an uneasy look. Another diner slowly lowered his phone, pretending he hadn't been watching. Everyone could sense it now. This wasn't about food anymore. This was about control. The waitress nodded again, lips pressed together, and turned slightly as if to leave. That's when the officer added one more comment, quieter, sharper. "Don't walk away from me when I'm talking to you." She stopped. Her back was to him now, but her hands trembled just enough to give her away. She turned back slowly, forcing herself to maintain eye contact. "I'm just going to check on your order, sir." Her voice was steady, but it took effort. You could hear it. Across the room, Steven Seagal watched without moving. He didn't glare. He didn't shake his head. He simply observed, the way someone does when they're trying to understand the full shape of a situation before acting. His eyes stayed on the officer, then shifted briefly to the waitress, noting her posture, her hesitation, the way she was being boxed in without a single physical threat. The officer seemed to sense the attention in the room, and instead of backing off, he leaned into it. "You know," he said louder now, "where I come from. People like you learn pretty fast how to show respect." That did it. A line had been crossed, not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly. Several heads turned. A low murmur rippled through the dining area, then died just as quickly. Stephen remained seated, calm, unreadable, but something had changed. Not in his expression, just in the stillness of him. The kind of stillness that comes before a decision. "Before we go any further, let me ask you something. What city and country are you watching this from? And honestly, if I were sitting in this restaurant right now, I'd be thinking, this isn't about law enforcement anymore. This is someone using a badge to make another human being feel small." I'd feel that tension in my chest, the kind where you're asking yourself, do I stay quiet? Or do I step in? Now you tell me, if you were in my place, what would be going through your mind in that moment? Back in the restaurant, the waitress finally stepped away, moving toward the kitchen with quick, controlled steps. The officer watched her go, satisfied, like he'd won something. Stephen's gaze followed her too, not with pity, just awareness. The officer took a sip of his drink and glanced around, daring anyone to challenge him. No one did. At least, not yet. And that was when Seagal quietly set his napkin down on the table. The waitress didn't make it far. She had taken only a few steps toward the kitchen when the officer's chair scraped loudly against the floor. The sound cut through the restaurant like a warning. Several people looked up at the same time. Conversation stalled. Forks paused midair. "Hey," the officer called out. "I'm not done talking to you." She froze for a moment. She considered pretending she hadn't heard him. You could see it in the slight hesitation of her shoulders, the way her hand tightened around the order pad. But the tone in his voice left little room for misunderstanding. Slowly, she turned back around. "Yes, sir?" she asked. The officer stood now, towering over her by a full head. Standing made the imbalance impossible to ignore. He took one step closer, just close enough to invade her space without technically touching her. "I said I don't like being ignored," he continued. "Is that hard to understand?" A hush fell over the restaurant. This wasn't subtle anymore. People shifted in their seats, eyes darting between the two of them. A man near the window cleared his throat, then thought better of it. A woman a few tables away whispered something to her partner, who shook his head slightly. The waitress swallowed. Her face had gone pale, but she held her ground. "I wasn't ignoring you," she said carefully. "I was doing my job." The officer let out a short, humorless laugh. "Your job," he repeated. "Your job is to listen when someone like me is talking." There it was. Not said outright, but understood by everyone in the room. The badge. The authority. The unspoken threat that came with it. Seagal watched as the space around the waitress seemed to shrink. She was boxed in now. Not by walls, but by expectation. If she spoke up, she risked escalation. If she stayed silent, the behavior would continue. It was a lose-lose situation. The kind that people in service roles knew all too well. The officer crossed his arms and tilted his head, studying her like she'd failed some invisible test. "Go on," he said. "Say something." Her lips parted, then closed again. She glanced toward the manager's station once more. Still no movement, whether it was fear, uncertainty, or policy. Help wasn't coming. Stephen noticed that too. The officer's voice dropped, but it didn't soften. "Or maybe you're just not smart enough to keep up." That sentence landed like a slap. A few people gasped quietly. Someone near the bar muttered, "That's enough," under their breath, but not loudly enough to be heard. The waitress blinked hard. Her eyes glistened, though she fought to keep her composure. "I'm trying to help you," she said. "Please don't talk to me like that." For the first time, the officer seemed surprised. Not angry surprised. As if he hadn't expected resistance, however gentle. He took another half step forward. "Or what?" he asked. What are you going to do? The question was rhetorical, and everyone knew it. Everyone except the waitress who stood there, trapped between dignity and fear. Across the room, Stephen's chair shifted slightly as he adjusted his posture. He still hadn't stood up. He still hadn't spoken. But his attention was fully locked in now, sharp and focused. This wasn't about bravado. It wasn't about stepping in to look heroic. Stephen understood something many people didn't. Moments like this required precision, not impulse. Timing mattered. The officer glanced around again, scanning the room, almost daring someone to challenge him. When no one did, a faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. That's when Stephen saw it. The exact moment the situation tipped from uncomfortable to unacceptable. The officer reached out and tapped the edge of the waitress's order pad with one finger. "Next time," he said quietly, "you'll learn to be more respectful." The waitress flinched, not dramatically, just enough to show the impact. Stephen exhaled slowly. If I were standing there watching this happen, my heart would be racing. I'd be thinking, this has gone way too far. Someone needs to step in. But how? And if I were that waitress? I know exactly what would be going through my mind. If I push back, will this get worse? If I stay quiet back in the restaurant, Steven Seagal slowly pushed his chair back, not loudly. Not suddenly. Just enough for the people closest to him to notice. And for the first time that night, the balance of the room began to shift. Steven Seagal stood up, not abruptly, not with any kind of dramatic flourish. He rose from his chair the way someone does when they've already made up their mind. The movement was calm, deliberate, almost quiet, but in a room already stretched thin with tension, it was enough to draw attention. A few diners noticed immediately. They didn't know who he was yet. Only that someone was finally moving when everyone else had stayed frozen. Stephen took a step forward, then another, closing the distance between his table and the confrontation. His hands were visible, relaxed at his sides. His posture wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't hesitant either. It was balanced. "Excuse me," he said. His voice wasn't loud. He didn't raise it to compete with the officer's authority. He simply spoke, clearly and evenly. The officer turned, annoyance already written across his face. "This doesn't concern you," he snapped. Stephen met his eyes without flinching. "It does now," Stephen replied. There was something in the way he said it. No challenge, no threat, that caused a subtle shift in the air. The officer seemed to register it too. He straightened slightly, as if reassessing. "I'm handling a situation," the officer said. "Why don't you sit back down?" Stephen glanced briefly at the waitress, then back to the officer. His tone remained respectful, but firmer now. "She's trying to do her job," he said, "and you're making that impossible." A ripple of quiet reaction moved through the restaurant, not applause, not cheers, just awareness. People leaned in, listening. The officer scoffed. "You don't know what you're talking about." Stephen nodded once, slowly. "I know exactly what I'm talking about. I've been watching." That landed differently. The officer's jaw tightened. He took a step toward Stephen, now trying to reassert control of the space. "You some kind of manager?" he asked. "No," Stephen said. "Then back off." Stephen didn't move. Instead, he spoke again, softer this time, but with a weight behind the words that carried farther than volume ever could. "Respect isn't something you demand," he said. "It's something you earn." The officer let out a sharp laugh. "Is that supposed to scare me?" Stephen shook his head. "Number. It's supposed to help you." That sentence caught the officer off guard. You could see it in the slight pause, the blink that came a second too late. The room went completely silent now. Even the kitchen sound seemed distant. Stephen continued, still calm. "You're off duty. You're in a public place, and you're speaking to her like she doesn't have a choice. That's not authority, that's intimidation." The officer opened his mouth to respond, then stopped. His eyes flicked briefly around the room. People were watching now. Not hiding it, not looking away. The waitress stood frozen, unsure where to look. Relief and fear tangled together on her face. Stephen shifted slightly, placing himself just enough between her and the officer to change the dynamic without blocking either of them. It wasn't protective in an obvious way. It was subtle, but it mattered. "If there's a problem with your meal," Stephen said, "the manager can handle it, but this stops here." For a long moment, the officer said nothing. Then, he smirked. "And what are you going to do about it?" he asked. It wasn't a threat. It was a test. Stephen didn't rise to it. "I'm giving you a chance," he replied, "to walk away from this with your dignity intact." The officer stared at him, trying to decide whether this man in front of him was bluffing, ignorant, or something else entirely. He didn't know Steven Seagal yet. He just knew he didn't like being challenged. The tension was thick enough to feel. A wrong word from either of them could tip everything into chaos. Stephen held his gaze, unblinking, unhurried. He wasn't there to dominate the moment. He was there to end it. And for the first time since this started, the officer hesitated. Not because of fear, but because something about the man standing in front of him didn't feel ordinary at all. The officer's hesitation was brief, but noticeable. For a man who had been loud, dismissive, and openly intimidating just moments ago, that pause spoke volumes. He hadn't expected resistance, certainly not from a stranger who refused to match his aggression. "You think you're some kind of hero?" the officer said finally, his voice edged with irritation. "This doesn't end well for people who get in my way." Steven Seagal didn't respond immediately. He let the words sit in the air, heavy and exposed. Then he spoke, slower than before. "Threats don't make you strong," he said. "They just tell everyone you're afraid of losing control." That was the comeback, not flashy, not loud, but precise. A few people in the crowd exchanged looks. Someone near the back let out a quiet, involuntary chuckle before quickly covering it up. The officer noticed. His eyes flicked toward the sound, then back to Stephen. "You don't know who you're talking to." The officer snapped. Stephen nodded. "You're right," he said. "I don't, and that's the problem." The officer frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Stephen continued evenly, "that power without accountability is dangerous. And right now, you're proving that point in front of a room full of witnesses." That word, witnesses, changed everything. The officer glanced around again, this time more sharply. Phones were out now, not hidden, not subtle. At least 3 people were recording openly, their cameras trained on the confrontation. His jaw tightened. "You all think this is funny, but no one looked away either." Stephen took advantage of the silence. "You came in here to eat," he said. "So did everyone else. She didn't provoke you. She didn't disrespect you. You chose to cross a line." The officer stepped closer, clearly trying to reclaim dominance. "And who's going to stop me?" Stephen didn't move back. "I already did," he said. "Not because of force. Not because of intimidation. Because the officer's voice cracked slightly when he responded. "You think standing there makes you important?" Stephen's eyes didn't leave his. "No," he said. "Doing the right thing does." That answer landed harder than any insult could have. The officer's posture stiffened. His shoulders were tense now, his confidence slipping through the cracks. He was used to people backing down, apologizing, shrinking. Stephen was doing none of those things. Instead, Stephen turned his head slightly toward the waitress. "You're done here," he said gently. "You can go." She hesitated, looking first at the officer, then at Stephen. When the officer didn't immediately object, she took a cautious step back, then another. Finally, she slipped past them and disappeared toward the kitchen, her breathing visibly unsteady. A quiet wave of relief moved through the room. The officer noticed, and didn't like it. "This isn't over," he said, more to himself than anyone else. Stephen looked at him, his expression calm but unyielding. "It is," he replied, "because you don't get to decide when other people feel small." For a moment, it looked like the officer might explode. His hands clenched at his sides. His face flushed red. Pride and anger wrestled openly on his features. Then something unexpected happened. The officer took a step back. Just one. It was small. Almost unnoticeable. But in that space, it was everything. Stephen didn't press forward. He didn't chase the moment. He simply stood there, letting the officer sit with what had just happened. "You should leave," Stephen added quietly, "before this becomes something you can't undo." The officer stared at him for a long second, then scoffed again, though this time it sounded hollow. "Enjoy your meal," he muttered. He turned and walked toward the exit, his movements stiff, his head held high in a way that fooled no one. As the door swung closed behind him, the tension finally broke. The restaurant exhaled as one. No applause. No cheering. Just a shared understanding that something important had happened. Stephen returned to his seat without another word, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. But everyone in that room knew better. And somewhere outside, the officer was beginning to realize that the moment he tried to assert power over the wrong people, he lost it instead. The door had barely finished swinging shut behind the officer when the restaurant began to breathe again. Low murmurs replaced the heavy silence. Chairs shifted. Someone let out a nervous laugh that had been trapped in their chest for far too long. A woman near the window whispered, "Did that really just happen?" to her friend, who nodded slowly, still staring at the door. Steven Seagal sat quietly at his table, unfolding his napkin as if the last 10 minutes hadn't unfolded at all. His expression was neutral, almost distant. He wasn't scanning the room for approval. He wasn't watching for reactions, but the room was watching him. From the kitchen, the waitress reappeared cautiously. The manager now beside her. The manager, a middle-aged man with a tense face and rolled-up sleeves, looked shaken. "Sir," the manager said, approaching Stephen. "I just want to say, thank you. I should have stepped in sooner." Stephen nodded once. "You did now," he replied. "That's what matters." The waitress stood a step behind the manager, hands clasped together. Her eyes were still glossy, but there was relief there too. "Thank you," she said softly. "I didn't know what else to do." Stephen looked at her, his voice gentle. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said. "Remember that." She nodded, swallowing hard, then stepped back toward the kitchen, a little steadier than before. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. The front door opened again. This time, it wasn't the same officer. A uniformed policeman stepped inside, scanning the room calmly. He spoke briefly to the host, who pointed subtly toward the back. The officer walked over, his expression professional. "I'm looking for Steven Seagal," he said. A ripple moved through the restaurant. Heads turned, eyes widened. "Steven Seagal," someone whispered. The officer stopped beside Stephen's table. "Sir," he said respectfully, "I just wanted to make sure everything here is under control. We received a call about an incident." Stephen stood, slowly, meeting the officer's gaze. "It's handled," he said. "No one was hurt." The officer nodded. Then something changed in his expression. Recognition. His eyes widened slightly, and he straightened instinctively. "Sir," he began, then stopped, choosing his words carefully. "Didn't realize it was you." And just like that, the final piece clicked into place. Murmurs spread through the restaurant. Faster now. "That's Steven Seagal." "The actor?" "No, he's trained law enforcement. He's an Aikido master." Phones were lifted again, not to record a confrontation this time, but to capture the realization. The officer cleared his throat. "The other officer has been identified," he said quietly. "This will be reported." Stephen didn't smile. He didn't nod triumphantly. "That's up to your department," he replied. "I'm not here for revenge." The officer studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Understood." When the officer left, the energy in the room was completely different from before. Where there had been fear, there was now respect. Where there had been silence, there was quiet admiration. Stephen sat back down, finally taking a sip of his drink. "Now let me be honest with you. If I were standing in that restaurant and suddenly realized the man who calmly shut everything down was Steven Seagal, I'd be replaying the whole scene in my head. I'd be thinking, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten anyone. He didn't even use his name. And if I were the officer who crossed that line, I know exactly what would hit me hardest. Not the embarrassment, but the realization that I was wrong in front of everyone. So now I want your honest answer. If you were Steven in that moment, would you reveal who you are, or stay silent like he did? And if you were a bystander, would you step in, or stay quiet?" By the time Steven Seagal stepped outside the restaurant, The night air felt different. Not calmer, clearer. Inside, people were already replaying the moment in their minds. Outside, the story had begun to travel faster than anyone could follow. A short clip of the confrontation. No shouting, no violence, just a quiet dismantling of abuse, was spreading across social media. Captions varied, but the message was the same. Power doesn't always look loud. Stephen didn't check his phone. He never did in moments like this. He walked to his car, paused briefly, and looked back at the glowing windows of the restaurant. Somewhere in there, a young waitress was finishing her shift with her dignity intact. That was enough. By morning, the video had gone viral. Millions of views, thousands of comments. People from all over the world weighed in, not just praising Stephen, but talking about moments they'd lived through themselves. Stories of being talked down to, of staying silent out of fear, of wishing someone had spoken up. The officers' department released a short statement later that day. It was carefully worded, but the meaning was clear. The incident was under review. The badge didn't shield behavior anymore, not when the world was watching. But the most powerful response didn't come from the department. It came from the waitress. In a brief interview, she said only this: "He reminded me I wasn't small." Those words traveled even farther than the video. Stephen never gave a press conference. He declined interview requests. When asked by a reporter later that week why he stepped in, his answer was simple: because someone needed to. That was it. No speeches, no self-praise. And that's why the moment mattered. Because it wasn't about a celebrity embarrassing a cop. It wasn't about a viral clip or a dramatic confrontation. It was about a line being crossed, and someone calmly drawing it back. Now let me ask you something, and answer it honestly. If you were in that restaurant, if you saw someone being cornered, disrespected, made to feel powerless, would you stay silent? Or would you be the one who stands up, calmly, firmly, without hate? If you believe respect should never depend on a uniform, a job title, or a badge, type respect in the comments right now. And if stories like this matter to you, stories where dignity wins without violence, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because the world doesn't change through shouting. It changes when ordinary moments meet extraordinary courage. And sometimes, all it takes is one person standing up the right way.